A wave of tension is rising across East Asia, driven by the collision of political rhetoric, military deployments, and sharply divergent interpretations of regional security. The situation has escalated steadily, fueled not only by what nations are doing, but by what they are saying, publicly, privately, and through pointed diplomatic exchanges. At the heart of the debate is Japan's recent posture toward Taiwan, its expanding military presence on its southwestern islands, and the intense reaction this has triggered in Beijing. The friction is not entirely new, but the temperature is higher, more visible, and more consequential than in previous cycles of disagreement. Japanese officials repeatedly insist that nothing fundamental has changed. They emphasize continuity, consistency, and stability in policy. Yet critics, especially those outside Japan, argue that these assurances mask a deeper shift, one that is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. This gap between Tokyo's stated position and Beijing's perception of it has widened into a full dispute with potential ramifications for the broader region. Concerns intensified when Japanese officials reiterated that their core stance remained unchanged, a point they made several times in recent briefings. Still, the lack of detailed explanation has kept observers, critics, and regional governments pressing for specifics. One critic summarized the frustration, saying, "We have clearly asked the Japanese side what exactly is the specific content of their so-called consistent position. Can the Japanese side fully and publicly articulate this consistent position?" He said this to highlight the perceived vagueness that has characterized Tokyo's messaging in recent weeks. The question was not merely rhetorical, it was meant to underscore what critics see as a deliberate ambiguity that allows Japan to maintain a reassuring diplomatic tone while quietly adjusting its security posture. Despite these repeated inquiries, Japan continues to state that nothing has changed, a phrase that has become a recurring talking point. Yet critics argue that Tokyo's refusal to address the Taiwan-related issues directly creates the impression that Japan is sidestepping legitimate requests for clarification. They believe the government's broad statements fail to confront the specific actions and remarks that triggered the controversy. This has reinforced the perception among Beijing officials and some regional analysts that Japan is deliberately avoiding the heart of the issue. Beijing's interpretation of Japan's messaging is sharp, unsparing, and charged with deeper strategic concerns. Chinese officials have said that Japan is ignoring requests to retract what they describe as erroneous remarks, insisting instead on repeating reassurances that China considers superficial. According to Beijing, Japan's approach is an attempt to muddle through a sensitive diplomatic situation without taking responsibility for statements that Beijing views as provocative or destabilizing. In the view of Chinese officials, this is not a mere communication problem. It is a deliberate strategy that allows Japan to maintain plausible deniability while expanding its military footprint near Taiwan. They argue that this pattern of communication, repeating reassurances while avoiding direct answers, erodes trust and strains diplomatic relations that were already fragile. Behind these diplomatic tensions lies one of the most concrete developments in the region: Japan's preparations to station a missile defense unit on Yonaguni Island, which sits roughly 110 kilometers east of Taiwan. This deployment involves advanced missile defense systems capable of tracking and intercepting approaching aircraft and ballistic missiles. Japanese officials frame this move as purely defensive, part of a broader effort to reinforce security on the nation's southwestern islands and protect key air and sea routes. Defense authorities have also argued that Japan's security environment has dramatically worsened in recent years. They point to growing military capabilities across the region, expanding ballistic missile programs, and the increasing frequency of foreign military aircraft and vessels operating near Japanese territory. For them, deploying new missile defense systems is a practical step to address real vulnerabilities and uphold national defense obligations. However, Beijing views the deployment very differently. Chinese officials have portrayed Japan's move not as defensive, but as a major provocation. One Chinese spokesperson called it a deliberate move that creates regional tensions and provokes military confrontation, saying that such actions should alarm neighbouring states and the international community. The use of this language, words like deliberate, provokes, and confrontation, marks a significant escalation and reflects the seriousness with which China interprets Japan's actions. This reaction is not limited to defence circles in Beijing. Analysts in the wider region have also expressed concern that Japan's missile deployments, especially their proximity to Taiwan, represent a significant shift away from Japan's traditional post-war defence posture. Japan's deployment of missile systems on Yonaguni is part of a larger network of defence upgrades across its southwestern island chain, including electronic warfare units, anti-ship missile batteries, and improved radar tracking installations. Critics, especially within China, argue that these developments represent an expansion of Japan's offensive capabilities, even if Japan describes them as defensive. The political dimension of these tensions intensified further when remarks in Japan's national legislature appeared to suggest that a potential crisis involving Taiwan could qualify as a survival-threatening situation for Japan. That phrase carries enormous legal and strategic weight under Japanese security law. It effectively opens the possibility of Japan engaging militarily under the doctrine of collective self-defense, a doctrine reinterpreted in recent years to allow Japan to aid an ally under attack, even if Japanese territory is not directly threatened. For China and other countries in the region, this statement signaled a major political and military shift. Prior administrations avoided this kind of explicit linkage between Taiwan and Japan's own survival. The new wording suggests that Japan is willing to contemplate a range of actions that would have been politically impossible even a decade ago. For many analysts, this is more than a rhetorical shift. It is a recalibration of Japan's national security identity. Japan is moving from an approach defined by strict self-defense toward what some describe as a more active, intervention-capable posture. This transition has unfolded over several years, shaped by growing cooperation with the United States, concerns about China's military modernization, and evolving threats in the Indo-Pacific region. But it is this latest combination of remarks and deployments that has sharpened international attention and heightened diplomatic tensions. Opponents of Japan's new stance warn that these moves risk undoing decades of caution, stability, and predictability that have defined Japan's post-war defense posture. Some critics point to Japan's deployment of weapon systems near Taiwan, its evolving legislative definitions of survival-threatening situations, and its deepening security ties with allied nations as evidence that the country may be entering a new phase of military assertiveness. They fear such steps could escalate tensions and increase the likelihood of accidental conflict. Some observers go further, describing the trajectory as a form of remilitarization, though this is strongly disputed within Japan. These critics argue that deploying offensive-capable systems so close to a potential flashpoint, combined with ambiguous language about security obligations, creates a situation where even minor miscalculations could trigger broader confrontation. In their view, these developments risk drawing multiple powers into a rapidly escalating conflict. From Tokyo's perspective, however, the reality is quite different. Japanese Defense Ministry officials argue that the country faces what they describe as the most severe and complex security environment since the end of World War II. In their view, Japan must strengthen its defenses not to provoke conflict, but to prevent it. The deployment of systems on Yonaguni and other islands is intended to ensure that Japan can defend itself, maintain surveillance, and deter potential aggression. Officials insist that these deployments are proportionate responses to regional security challenges, not steps toward militarization. Yonaguni Island itself has undergone a significant transformation over the past decade. Once a remote location known primarily for its proximity to Taiwan, it has become a strategically important part of Japan's defense posture. Radar installations, enhanced surveillance capabilities, and newly planned missile defense systems are turning the island into a central node in Japan's expanding early warning and interception network. For critics, this transformation is troubling because of the island's closeness to Taiwan. They argue that any conflict in the Taiwan Strait would automatically bring Japanese territory into operational relevance, even if Japan wished to avoid involvement. This closeness, they say, raises the risk that Japan could be drawn into a conflict by proximity alone, regardless of its intentions. Beijing's reaction has been swift and forceful. Chinese officials have repeatedly denounced Japan's actions and statements, insisting that they undermine regional stability. Beijing has also reiterated its commitment to what it considers its territorial sovereignty, vowing to defend national and territorial integrity against any perceived provocations. Some officials have stated that if Japan continues on its current path, all nations that value justice should oppose what they describe as the resurgence of Japanese militarism. This language reflects a deep historical sensitivity in China, where memories of Japan's pre-1945 military actions remain vivid in political discourse, education, and public opinion. Chinese officials often frame contemporary security tensions within this historical context, arguing that vigilance is necessary to prevent a repeat of past aggression. Japan, however, rejects these characterizations as politically charged and inaccurate. Inside Japan, the government maintains that its policies are defensive, measured, and transparent. Officials emphasize that the country remains committed to dialogue, diplomacy, and peaceful resolution of disputes. They argue that the so-called consistent position remains firmly anchored in Japan's post-war principles, and that nothing in the recent statements or deployments contradicts these underlying commitments. Nevertheless, skepticism persists. Analysts point to a combination of factors: the deployment of missiles, the expansion of the defense budget, the reinterpretation of security laws, and the rhetoric in the national legislature as evidence that Japan is subtly but significantly shifting its stance. They argue that even if Japan does not intend to escalate tensions, its actions may unintentionally contribute to a more volatile security environment. One critic, reflecting on these developments, summarized the concern by saying, "Japan deploys offensive weapons on southwestern islands near Taiwan, deliberately creating regional tension and military confrontation." He said this to highlight what he viewed as the destabilizing consequences of Japan's decisions. He later added that this development is extremely dangerous and demands the utmost vigilance from neighboring countries and the entire international community. These statements encapsulate the broader regional anxiety, reflecting the belief that shifting military postures and ambiguous political messaging are increasing the risk of miscalculation. In the broader geopolitical landscape, the situation is made even more complex by ongoing developments involving the United States, its security commitments in the region, and its stated policy regarding Taiwan. Japan's evolving defense posture is deeply intertwined with its alliance with Washington, which views Japan as a critical partner in maintaining stability in the Indo-Pacific. This alliance provides Japan with strategic reassurance, but also links Tokyo more closely to regional flashpoints. Other regional actors, including South Korea, Australia, and Southeast Asian nations, are watching these developments closely. For some, Japan's expanded security role is welcome, seen as a counterbalance to rising tensions and expanding military capabilities in the region. For others, it raises questions about the long-term stability of an already delicate regional balance. As the diplomatic exchanges continue, one thing is clear: the boundaries between deterrence, defense, and provocation are increasingly blurred. Actions that once attracted little attention are now scrutinized intensely. Every statement, deployment, or policy shift becomes part of a larger regional narrative in which nations are recalculating their security strategies in real time. What happens next depends on decisions made not only in Tokyo and Beijing, but across the broader Indo-Pacific. Will Tokyo clarify its intentions more explicitly? Will Beijing continue to escalate its rhetoric? Will other regional powers intervene diplomatically to ease tensions? Or will they adopt their own more assertive postures in response? For now, the uncertainty remains and the heat is unmistakably rising.